Welcome to Buried Whisper. Before we begin, I have just one question for you. Where are you watching from right now? Is it late at night, alone in your room, or maybe in the dark with only your screen glowing? Tell me in the comments what kind of horror chills you the most, because tonight's story might feel a little too real depending on where you are and what time it is. I used to live in a quiet suburb outside of Sacramento, California, the kind of place where every house looked like a variation of the same blueprint. Light siding, neatly trimmed lawns, a few ornamental bushes by the driveway. It wasn't bad. People waved when you drove past. Garage doors opened and closed with the same humming rhythm at 7 in the morning and 6 in the evening, and kids rode their bikes down the wide, almost too clean streets. I rented a single-story home on Briarwood Lane, tucked between two nearly identical houses. The rent was manageable because the place sat near the edge of the neighborhood, close to a stretch of undeveloped land. This happened 2 summers ago, in late July. I remember it clearly because the weather was that mix of heavy and restless. The day had been hot, one of those cloudless California days that baked the sidewalks white. But by late evening, the sky had shifted. Heavy twilight clouds rolled in, painting everything in deep shades of blue and purple. I had just finished mowing my front yard and was putting the tools away in the garage when the first odd thing happened. Across the street, the house directly opposite mine had its blinds open. That wasn't unusual, but the interior lights were off, and the silhouette of someone was standing in the window. At first I thought it was just one of the family members, maybe the father of the house watching the storm rolling in. But when I looked again, I realized I couldn't make out any features, just a dark outline very still against the gray dimness inside. It didn't move when I glanced back. I tried not to think much of it, told myself I was being paranoid. I went inside, made dinner, and settled on the couch with my phone. Around 8:30, the last light of the day had drained out of the sky, and the overcast made the neighborhood darker than usual. I turned on the porch lamp and, almost without thinking, peeked outside again. The silhouette was gone, but the window was still wide open, curtain drawn aside as if someone had left in a hurry. No lights, just that empty, unlit rectangle staring back. Later that night, maybe closer to 10, I was in bed scrolling when I heard the faint sound of gravel crunching outside my window. I froze, holding my breath. It was subtle, like someone stepping lightly in the front yard. My house had flower beds and bushes close to the siding, and sometimes stray cats padded through, so I told myself that's what it was. Still, I got up, flicked on the porch light, and pulled the blinds apart just enough to peek out. The street was still, silent. A single porch lamp across the way flickered weakly. But when I looked at the house opposite mine, my stomach dropped. The curtain had been drawn back again, and this time I was sure someone was standing just beyond the glass. Closer than before. No detail, no color, just that shape. Facing my direction. Watching. I whispered out loud to myself, "It's just your imagination." But my voice sounded weak, not convincing even to me. The next morning I decided to ask around. I caught the neighbor on the left side of me, Mrs. Flores, while she was watering her front yard. I asked casually if the family across the street had been home lately. She frowned, tilted her head, and said, "That house? Nobody's lived there since last year. They moved down to Bakersfield. It's been empty ever since." I laughed nervously, thanked her, and walked back inside. But my chest felt hollow, like all the air had gone out of me. Empty. I knew what I saw. That night, the air hung heavy with the promise of rain. I sat in the living room with the curtains shut, TV volume low. Around 11, a soft knock rattled against my front door. Not a pounding, just a gentle knock like someone who didn't want to wake the whole neighborhood. I froze. I didn't move an inch, just stared at the door. The porch light was on, but I didn't dare look through the peephole. After a minute, another knock came, slightly louder this time. Then silence. I waited, every nerve in my body tense, until, finally, I reached for my phone and dialed the non-emergency police line. I explained that someone was at my door and I lived alone. The dispatcher told me to stay inside and that an officer would come by to check the area. 10 minutes later, red and blue lights washed faintly over my living room walls. I opened the door when the officer knocked, and he walked the perimeter with his flashlight. Nothing. No footprints, no sign of forced entry. He told me it might have been a prank, maybe kids testing doors. He assured me it was safe. But I noticed he avoided looking too long at the dark house across the street. I didn't sleep much that night. Every creak of the house sounded amplified, like someone moving just out of sight. The final straw came a week later. It was around 2 in the morning. I woke up suddenly, no sound, no reason, just that instinctive feeling that you're not alone. My bedroom window faced the street and I kept the blinds down but not fully closed. Through the narrow gap I could see across the road. The window in the empty house was wide open again. And someone was there. This time, though, it wasn't just a shape. The pale outline of a face was pressed against the glass. I could make out the features in horrifying clarity under the weak glow of the street lamp. The contours of cheeks, the bridge of a nose, the unmistakable gleam of eyes staring directly at my room. I shot out of bed and yanked the blinds shut, heart hammering so violently I thought I might faint. I grabbed my keys and drove away without even turning on the lights inside. I sat in a gas station parking lot until the sun came up. The following day, I called the property management company that handled rentals in the area. I asked about the house across the street if someone new had moved in. The woman on the phone sounded confused. She told me it was still vacant, scheduled for remodeling, no tenants listed. I moved out of Briarwood Lane 2 weeks later. I didn't tell the landlord the real reason. I said I needed to relocate closer to work. But even now, whenever twilight clouds gather and the sky turns that heavy shade of blue, I think about that house and the face pressed to the window, watching from across the street. Sometimes I wonder if it wasn't the house that was empty, but something else entirely that wanted me to think otherwise. And I still avoid that neighborhood whenever I drive through Sacramento. I grew up in Northern California, a quiet little suburb outside Sacramento where the streets all looked the same. Houses were low, single-story, spaced evenly with trimmed lawns and driveways that smelled faintly of hot concrete in the summer. On evenings when the air cooled down and the cicadas gave way to the hum of sprinklers, everything felt safe, almost boring. That's exactly why what happened to me still gnaws at me years later, because it didn't belong in a neighborhood like mine. I want to believe it was just a strange encounter with a stranger, but the more I replay it, the less sense it makes, and the less I sleep at night. It was late October, about 7:15 in the evening. The sun had just dipped below the tree line, and the sky was that kind of deep navy blue twilight, still bright enough to see without a flashlight, but fading fast. I remember because I had just come home from work, and the automatic porch lights had clicked on. The siding of our house looked pale gray under the soft orange bulbs, and the yard had that freshly watered smell because my dad had run the sprinklers earlier. The air was cool but not cold, the kind of crisp California fall that makes you want to wear a hoodie even if you don't need it. I parked in the driveway instead of pulling into the garage, partly because I was too tired to bother with the remote, partly because I liked sitting in my car for a moment after work. Our street was dead quiet. No kids outside, no cars driving by, just that low, distant hum of the freeway a mile away. That's when I noticed the figure. At first, I thought it was just one of the neighbors out for a walk, but the way they stood there made me pause. Across the street, 2 houses down, by the edge of a trimmed hedge, a tall person stood completely still. They weren't facing the street or even pretending to look around. They were angled slightly toward my house, like they had been watching me pull up and just stopped. I told myself maybe they were checking their phone or catching their breath from a jog. But something about the posture was wrong. Their shoulders were too straight, their arms stiff at their sides, and their head didn't tilt down at all, like there wasn't a phone. Just staring. I locked my car and tried to brush it off, walking toward the front door quickly. The porch lamps lit up the walkway, but the rest of the street had sunk into that dim, moody twilight. When I turned the key in the lock, I couldn't help glancing over my shoulder. They hadn't moved. Inside, the house felt normal, warm. The smell of leftover chili from dinner still lingered. My mom was out visiting my aunt and my dad was on a night shift, so I had the place to myself. I tried to distract myself, microwaving some food and flipping through channels, but that gnawing thought kept tugging. Why would someone just stand there, in plain sight, doing nothing? Around 8:30, I peeked through the blinds in the living room. The figure was gone. The street was empty again. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding and told myself it had been nothing. People do weird things. Maybe it was a neighbor waiting for a ride. I tried to believe that. Later that night, maybe close to 10, I was in my room scrolling my phone when I heard it. 3 slow knocks on the front door. They weren't tentative, like a neighbor needing something. They were deliberate, evenly spaced, almost polite but wrong. I froze, listening. We had a doorbell. Nobody in our neighborhood knocked unless the power was out or they were trying not to wake someone. I stayed still, waiting. After maybe 30 seconds, I crept to the front hallway. The porch light was still on, spilling that golden glow over the door. Through the frosted glass pane beside it, I could see a blurry silhouette. Tall, motionless. My stomach dropped. I whispered to myself, "Don't open it. Don't even make a sound." The figure didn't knock again. They just stood there. 1 minute passed. 2. I remember the clock ticking in the kitchen sounding impossibly loud. My throat was dry. I considered calling the cops, but what would I even say? That someone was knocking on my door at a reasonable hour? That they were tall? It felt like nothing, and yet every instinct screamed that it wasn't nothing. Finally, I heard the creak of footsteps retreating down the porch steps. I stayed rooted in place, waiting until the night swallowed up any sound. When I finally dared to check through the blinds again, the street was empty. I should have called someone. Instead, I locked every window, double-checked the back door, and sat in my room with the TV on low. The glow of the screen and the hum of canned laughter made me feel less alone. I don't know when I drifted off, but I woke with my phone buzzing on my chest at 1:27 a.m. It was a text from my neighbor across the street. "Hey, sorry to bother you this late. Did you have someone visiting tonight? Saw a guy standing in your yard for a while around 10:30. Thought it was weird." My stomach turned to ice. I hadn't heard anything after the knocking. I hadn't seen anyone out there. I texted back asking what he looked like. All I could tell was tall, dark clothes. He was just standing on your grass facing your house. Didn't move for at least 10 minutes. Then I looked again and he was gone. I didn't sleep after that. I sat awake until the sky started to lighten, every creak of the house making me jump. I never told my parents the full story. I didn't want them to think I was paranoid. But for weeks after, I noticed little things. The faint impression of shoe prints in the lawn. The sound of what I thought was someone breathing outside my window one night, though when I pulled the blinds, no one was there. It never escalated into anything more. Nobody broke in. Nobody was arrested. Life just went on. But every time I come home now and see the warm light of the porch lamps cutting through the blue dusk, I feel that same hollow dread in my chest. Because I know what I saw. I know someone was out there watching. And the worst part? Sometimes when I drive home late at night, I catch myself scanning the shadows at the end of the street, half expecting to see that same tall, unmoving figure waiting again, watching. It was the summer of 2014, late July, and the evenings in Northern California had that heavy kind of twilight where the heat lingers long after the sun dips behind the hills. I was living just outside Sacramento in a quiet little suburban neighborhood, the kind where every lawn looked like it had been trimmed by the same invisible gardener. The houses were all single-story ranch styles, pale siding, stone chimneys, the kind of neat uniformity that gave the street a postcard feel. On this particular evening, it was a little past 8:30. The sky overcast with streaks of deep blue clouds, and a faint breeze carried the smell of watered lawns and hot asphalt cooling in the night. I was standing in my driveway, sipping the last of an iced coffee from earlier, watching the light shift as one by one, porch lamps blinked to life along the cul-de-sac. It was peaceful in that way that made you almost forget the world could ever be threatening. Kids' bicycles leaned against fences, sprinklers ticked rhythmically down the street, and the sound of a TV laugh track carried faintly from one of the open windows nearby. Nothing about it should have felt unusual. And yet, for reasons I couldn't explain, I had this tiny, nagging sensation in my stomach that I wasn't as alone as I appeared to be. I shrugged it off, went inside, and locked the door behind me. My girlfriend, Lena, was stretched out on the couch, scrolling on her phone with the TV murmuring in the background. I remember telling her something about how the neighborhood felt strange tonight, like the air was thicker than usual. She laughed and said I was just being paranoid, that I needed to stop reading so many creepy stories online before bed. Maybe she was right, but the feeling didn't go away. It stayed with me, humming low under my skin like static. Around 9:15, the power flickered. Not just in our house, but all up and down the street. I could see the porch lamps outside wink, out for a second, then snap back on. Nothing fell silent exactly, but there was this subtle shift. You don't notice how many little background noises you live with until they vanish, and in that moment everything felt unnaturally still. The refrigerator clicked off, the AC paused, and the house seemed to take a long breath it wasn't supposed to. Probably just the grid, Lena muttered, barely looking up. But I went to the front window and pulled back the curtain. Across the street, one of the houses was dark, like it hadn't come back on at all. Just a black square with no porch light, no glow in the windows, nothing. That struck me as odd because I was sure I'd seen lights there earlier. As I was watching, something moved. Not in the street, but behind the darkened window of that house. A shape passed slowly across, like someone pacing inside with no lights on. I froze because the way it moved didn't look casual, not like someone going about their business. It was too slow, too deliberate, as if it knew it was being watched. I couldn't make out features, just the faintest silhouette against the glass. "Hey, come look at this," I called to Lena. But by the time she came over, the window was empty. She gave me a skeptical look, told me again that I was overthinking, and wandered back to the couch. I kept standing there, staring out at that house. My neighbors there, the Petersons, were out of town. They'd mentioned it the week before at a neighborhood barbecue. Their teenage son had been feeding the dog while they were gone, but they didn't have a dog anymore. The old retriever had passed months back. I thought about calling them, but what would I say? That I'd seen a shadow in their window when their house should have been empty. It felt flimsy, even as the thought crossed my mind. By 10 Lena went to bed. I stayed up, restless. Around 10:30, I heard a faint scraping sound outside, like metal dragging against concrete. I muted the TV and listened. It came again, longer, this time like someone was pulling something heavy down the sidewalk. When I peered through the blinds, the street was empty. Empty, but not right. Across the street, the dark house's front door was slightly open. Just a crack, but I knew I hadn't seen it that way earlier. I stared hard, heart thudding, trying to convince myself it had been like that the whole time and I hadn't noticed. Then something stepped out onto the porch. I can't describe it properly because it looked like a person, but wrong in small, subtle ways. Tall, thin, shoulders too squared, head tilting too far to the side. They just stood there in the glow from a neighbor's lamp down the block, not moving, not walking, just waiting. I swear it was looking directly at my house. I backed away from the window so fast the blinds rattled. My skin prickled all over and every instinct screamed at me to stay quiet. I wanted to wake Lena, but I didn't want to take my eyes off the street. When I finally dared to peek again, the porch was empty. The door, however, was now wide open, showing nothing but black inside. At some point, maybe 5 minutes later, I noticed something even worse. Our own front porch light had gone out. I hadn't heard it click, hadn't seen it flicker. It was just gone. The yard was darker now, shadows stretching longer, swallowing more of the lawn. I couldn't shake the idea that whatever had been across the street was closer now, hidden in that dark patch between the bushes and the curb. I locked every door and window I could, double-checked them twice, then sat on the couch with the baseball bat I kept in the closet. The hours dragged, each one slower than the last. I thought I heard footsteps in the grass once, faint but steady, circling, though every time I looked, nothing was there. Around 3 a.m., the Petersons' front door slammed shut. No wind, no noise, just a sharp, echoing slam that jolted me upright. When I rushed to the window, the porch light across the street flicked on. Their house looked normal again, door closed, windows still. Too normal, like nothing had happened at all. By the time the sun came up, the neighborhood was bathed in that soft golden light that makes everything look harmless. Lena teased me over breakfast about how little I'd slept, saying I let my imagination get the better of me. But later that afternoon, I ran into the Petersons' son in the driveway. I asked if he'd been over the night before. He gave me a confused look and shook his head. He hadn't been by in days. I didn't tell him what I saw. I didn't tell anyone because I don't think they'd believe me. But sometimes, when the sky is that same shade of deep twilight blue and the porch lamps flicker on one by one, I catch myself staring too long at that house across the street. And every once in a while I could swear I see someone still standing, there in the window, watching, waiting for me to notice. I grew up in California, the kind of suburbia most people would describe as safe, boring even. Single-story houses with light gray siding, clean lawns, and quiet residential streets where nothing ever seemed to happen. I'm not the kind of person who tells ghost stories, but what happened to me in that neighborhood left a mark I still can't shake. If you're from California, you know that late summer dusk, when the sky bruises into a deep blue, and the air smells faintly of warm asphalt and cut grass. That's when it all started. It was August, around 8:15 in the evening, when I pulled into my driveway after a long day of work. The garage door was shut, and the house looked exactly as it always did. One front window glowed faintly gold. The porch lamps hummed against the dimming light. The street was empty, unusually so. No kids on bikes, no neighbors walking their dogs, not even the sound of a car passing. Just the faint drone of cicadas, the rustle of leaves in a dry breeze, and that vast, stretching quiet of a suburban street that felt almost staged, like the set of a movie. I got out of my car and locked it, glancing across the street. The Johnsons' house was dark, which was odd because they always had their TV on, spilling bluish light into the night. Next door, the Petersons' curtains were drawn tight. My neighborhood was usually alive with those tiny background noises that make you feel secure without even realizing it. But that night, it was like the volume had been turned down on the whole world. I tried to shrug it off as me being tired. I unlocked my front door and stepped inside, greeted by the familiar cool air of the AC. My house always smelled faintly of coffee and the lemon cleaner I used on weekends. Nothing was out of place. I kicked off my shoes, tossed my keys on the counter, and started heating leftovers in the microwave. Normal. Routine. Except halfway through the low hum of the microwave, I realized I could hear something else beneath it. A faint, irregular tapping. I muted the microwave and stood still. The sound stopped. I told myself it was nothing, probably the air ducts or the house settling. California houses make noises at night when the temperatures shift. But later, when I sat on the couch with my food, I heard it again, not inside this time, but outside. A light tapping like knuckles on glass. I froze. The only glass near me was the front window, the one with the soft lamp glowing behind its curtains. I didn't want to look. You know that instinct you get, when something in you says not to. But of course I did. I stood slowly and pulled the curtain back just an inch. The street outside was empty. Nothing moved, but the Johnsons' house, directly across from mine, had one upstairs window glowing faintly. The problem was, the Johnsons' house was a single-story home, just like mine. I blinked hard, trying to process what I was looking at. There was no upstairs, but I could see the light. A soft rectangle of pale yellow, as if someone had switched on a lamp in a room that shouldn't exist. The tapping came again, louder this time, right at the glass where my face had been seconds ago. I jerked back, heart hammering, and the curtain swayed slightly as if something had brushed against it. I stood in the middle of my living room clutching my phone and considered calling someone. But who? The police? What was I going to say? That my neighbor's house had a window where it shouldn't and something was tapping on mine? I forced myself to breathe, locked the front door again just in case, and went through the house checking all the windows. Every latch was secure, nothing outside. When I circled back to the front, the phantom window across the street was gone. The Johnsons' house was dark again, empty and ordinary. I didn't sleep much that night. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of voices. Not loud, but murmuring, like a low conversation coming from outside my bedroom window. My room faced the backyard, not the street, and my backyard was fenced in. I slipped out of bed, careful not to make the floorboards creak, and leaned close to the glass. It was pitch black back there, no porch lights, no moon. But the voices were clear. 2 of them, maybe more, whispering in a language I didn't recognize. The sound wasn't muffled. It was like they were pressed up right against the siding of the house. I grabbed my phone, hit record, and held it near the window. The voices stopped instantly. The silence that followed was thick, like the air itself was listening. Then something dragged slowly across the siding, a long, deliberate scrape, before vanishing into quiet. I stayed up until dawn, lights on, heart pounding. When the sun rose and I checked outside, the siding beneath my window had fresh scratches running down it. Thin, almost delicate lines, too high for any animal. The next day, I asked my neighbors casually if they had heard anything strange. The Petersons avoided my eyes and just shook their heads. Mrs. Johnson, watering her front lawn, gave me the weirdest look when I brought up the light I thought I saw in her house. She said, "There hasn't been a light on in my house for weeks. We're staying at my sister's. You must have dreamed it." That night I tried to convince myself it had all been exhaustion, stress, something rational. But around the same time as before, I saw it again. A window glowing in the Johnsons' roofline where no window should be. And this time, I wasn't alone. A figure stood silhouetted against the light, motionless, watching. I shut my blinds, turned off every light, and sat in the dark, my phone clutched in my hand. I wanted to call someone so badly, but I couldn't even think of the words I'd use. Hours passed. Around 3 in the morning, I heard the tapping again. Not just on one window, every window. A slow, synchronized rhythm circling the house. I don't know how long it went on. I must have passed out from fear or exhaustion, because when I opened my eyes, pale sunlight was seeping into the blinds, and the world looked normal again. No scratches, no voices, no figures. The Johnsons' house was as plain and empty as it had always been. I never saw the glowing window after that, but sometimes at night I still hear the faint tapping. It's irregular, like someone trying to remind me they're still there. And when I wake up too suddenly, heart racing in the quiet of my California street, I swear I hear whispers fading just as I open my eyes. If you live in a neighborhood like mine with identical houses and quiet streets, don't assume the silence means safety. Sometimes it means you're the only one left awake, and whatever is outside knows it. I grew up in a quiet suburb just outside Sacramento, the kind of place people drive through without remembering the street names. My parents bought a single-story house there in the mid-90s, and it never changed much. Light gray siding, a small porch with 2 lamps that glowed faintly in the evenings, and a narrow driveway that led to a closed garage. I moved out years ago, but last summer I went back to house sit for my parents while they took a trip to visit my aunt in Arizona. It was July, and I remember the exact time the first strange thing happened. It was around 8:15 p.m., just after sunset. The sky had that heavy overcast look, deep blue clouds pressing low but not spilling rain. The air smelled faintly of cut grass from a neighbor's mower earlier in the day, mixed with that warm asphalt, scent that lingers after a hot afternoon. I had just finished dinner, washed the dishes, and stepped outside onto the porch with a beer. The street was quiet, almost eerily so. The entire neighborhood seemed to be on pause. Most houses had their curtains drawn. A single porch lamp flickered down the block, and somewhere far off I could hear the hum of a car, but otherwise it was silent. The porch light above me threw, a soft golden glow across the driveway, and I remember feeling oddly safe in that stillness. I don't know why, but as I stood there, I became aware of the window to the living room on my right. The blinds were tilted slightly open. Through them, I could see the faint reflection of the porch light and a shadow of myself standing there. But as I leaned a little closer, I realized something didn't add up. There was another shape in the reflection. It was faint, almost like a trick of the glass, but it looked like a figure standing just behind me, inside the house. At first, I thought it was the coat rack near the door, but the longer I stared, the more it seemed wrong. The shape was too tall, too narrow, like someone standing very still with their arms close to their sides. I turned quickly, swinging the door open, and stepping inside, but there was nothing there. Just the empty living room with my parents' beige couch, the TV, and the neatly arranged photo frames on the mantel. My heartbeat slowed and I laughed it off, convincing myself I was spooking myself for no reason. Maybe the reflection caught, the lamp in a weird angle. I settled back inside, locked the front door, and put on some TV. By 10 p.m., the house was quiet again, and I started to doze off in the recliner. That was when I heard it. A soft tapping sound from the front window. 3 slow, deliberate taps. I muted the TV and sat up, straining to listen. My first thought was a tree branch, but there are no trees in front of the house, only the trimmed bushes that sit well below the window line. After a few seconds of silence, I got up and cautiously peeked through the blinds. The street was empty. The porch light glowed steadily, illuminating the driveway and the neatly cut lawn. Nothing moved. No kids, no animals, no cars. Still, I couldn't shake the sound. I went to bed a little uneasy that night, double-checking the locks and closing every curtain. Sleep didn't come easy. I kept waking to the creaks and groans of the old house, sounds I hadn't heard in years. Around 3 a.m., I woke again, this time certain I'd heard something in the hallway outside the bedroom. It was the soft shuffle of footsteps. I held my breath and listened, heart pounding. The sound lasted only a few seconds, then faded into silence. I wanted to believe it was just the house settling, but deep down I knew footsteps when I heard them. I stayed awake until dawn, clutching my phone in case I needed to call someone, though I didn't know who I would call. The next morning, everything looked normal. Sunlight poured into the kitchen, the smell of dew from the lawn drifting in through the slightly open window. I convinced myself I'd been dreaming, that the footsteps were in my head. I made coffee, scrolled through my phone, and tried to shake the unease. That night, though, things escalated. Around 9 p.m., I stepped out again with another beer, trying to recreate the calm from the first evening. The street was empty as usual. But when I turned to glance back at the house, I froze. The living room window glowed softly from the lamp inside, and for a split second, I saw someone standing at the blinds, a pale face pressed close to the glass, watching me. I dropped the beer bottle, the sound of it shattering loud against the driveway. My pulse spiked. I yanked open the door, heart hammering, and stormed inside, expecting to find someone breaking in. The living room was empty. The curtains swayed slightly as if they'd just been disturbed, but no one was there. I checked every room, even the closets. Nothing. I barely slept that night. The footsteps returned, clearer this time. Slow pacing up and down the hall, stopping, just outside my bedroom door. I could hear the faint creak of the floorboards under invisible weight. I stayed frozen under the blanket, too terrified to move, staring at the sliver of light under the door, as if something might block it at any second. By morning, I was exhausted. I called my parents and told them everything was fine, not wanting to scare them, but inside I felt like I was unraveling. The last night was the worst. It was about 11 p.m. when I heard the tapping again at the window, louder this time, more insistent. I stayed on the couch, frozen, trying to ignore it. But then it stopped, replaced by a different sound, the creak of the garage door. It was slow, like someone lifting it inch by inch, metal groaning against metal. I grabbed a kitchen knife and crept to the hallway, every nerve on fire. The sound stopped suddenly. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. I finally worked up the courage to look through the side door that led into the garage. The overhead light was off, but in the darkness I swore I could make out the faint outline of someone standing between my dad's workbench and the parked car. Tall, still, waiting. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and didn't open it again until morning. When my parents returned the next day, I told them everything. My dad checked the garage, the locks, the windows. Nothing was out of place. No sign of forced entry. He told me I was probably just tired, that the neighborhood was safe, that I'd let my imagination get the better of me. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear the tapping.